Hello, everyone. We are now going towards an extremely important step in our series of lessons, the one concentrating on Christology, on the figure of Christ, and especially the relationship of the figure of Christ with attempts at reconciliation. For sure, the status given to Christ and the relationship to the historical figure of Jesus is a central question for any theological endeavor. Christ is central for any Christian theology. It goes without saying. But we will not examine all the ways through which various Asian theology have dealt with the topic, but how this topic inserts itself into our focus on reconciliation. As a starting point, let me note that the way to approach Jesus and Christ can start from different standpoints. There are differences in the approach in the biblical corpus, especially the late Pauline epistles start with an high Christology, with the role of Christ throughout the beginning of time or before the beginning of time till the final times. The Gospel of Mark has a much more, I would say, concrete way of making us approach Jesus and discover Christ in Jesus, and so on. So there is a multiplicity of books in the New Testament because there is a multiplicity of ways to approach Jesus and to realize, I would say, this operation of linkage between those two words, Jesus and Christ. And this diversity will be reflected as well in Asian Christology. Let me start with a specific attempt that is interesting because it connects the Gospel with a fundamental Asian classics, the Analects of Confucius. And Mark van Chezhong notes that this classic, which is a lively record of the exchange between Confucius and his disciples, constitutes a pedagogical universe. I think the word is good because indeed the Gospels as well are a pedagogical universe. And this universe opens up the reader to the joy of teaching and learning. Similarly, during his public life, Jesus leads his disciples toward enlightenment through efficient and sometimes paradoxical learning experiences. In both cases, an investigation into the nature of the world is underway, an investigation that Jesus extends towards the full revelation of God's mystery. The way and the door are two metaphors that we find both in the Analects and the Gospel of John. Those two words are central in both the Analects and the Gospel of John. And it helps us to understand the attitude of the Master, who is humble enough for opening a path on which the disciple can travel. And when you cross a door, you don't stay at the threshold. You cross it for going further. Confucius remains the model of the Master in Chinese world, the one who opened the road towards inner freedom and constant spiritual progress. By appropriating Confucius' ways of proceedings, maybe Chinese Christians can even better apprehend how deeply rooted in the nature of things and of humankind is the way of Jesus, and marvel at the work of the spirits throughout all cultural time. So Confucius, in that perspective, is a prefiguration of Jesus, not so much by his teaching, but by his way of relating to the disciples and opening up a new world, by being also a way and a door. In this sense, says a text of FEBC that actually has been mainly authored by Mark Fang, so which is a kind of conclusion of the reflection of Mark Fang. L'union is similar to the Christian Gospels, both in content, mainly the relationship of master with his disciple, and in the way of becoming a book, a living memory of deeds and words, recorded and preserved by a group of disciples. This is why a reading of l'union, in a way similar to the reading of the Gospels, is inspiring and mutually enriching. It is mutually enriching in the sense that as the Old Testament is not only fulfilled by the New Testament, but also illuminates and complements it, so l'union is saying many things about teacher disciples not said in the Gospels, but that are somehow accomplished in them. This is made possible because the same Spirit was and is working in the Old Testament, in the Gospel, and in the ancient sages. Now, the view propounded by Mark Fang and other Chinese theologians is quite concrete in that sense. It is anchored between two narratives, l'union and the Gospels. Sometimes one can find a more globalized, a more abstract Christological styles, which is linked to the search for harmony. Jesus, for instance, in this Vietnamese theologian I already mentioned, Jonathan Tan, is viewed as the crucified and risen sage. So he is a sage in the Asian sense of the word that has been crucified and risen. Jesus, from his incarnation with kenosis, his emptying of himself, that we have seen somehow reflected in the reflection on supreme being and no being in one being, makes his union with the Father become the locus through which he interacts with and acts upon the outer world. Uniting truth and life, Jesus, the way, is ultimately the source of harmony. But we could come back much earlier in the way Jesus has been appropriated by Asian thinkers, and sometimes by thinkers we wouldn't have sourced us. There is an article called Christianity and the Chinese People in Xinjiang, who was done by its founder, Chen Duxiu, a founding member of the Communist Party, expelled from it in 1921. And the article of Chen Duxiu till now is very well known because it's indeed really interesting. Crossing through the door of Jesus himself, we should internalize, make our own, the great characteristic of Jesus and his profound concern for humanity. The portrait here of Jesus he drew stressed feature relevant for the building up of a new Chinese civilization: spirit of sacrifice, spirit of forgiveness, equality, universality in love, Jian-ai, like in Mozart. Jesus, he concluded, was first and foremost the friend of the poor. So this is an article published in 1920. But there has been more complex and I would say somehow ambiguous view of Jesus delivered by Chinese thinkers of the time of the Chinese Republic. There is notably a famous text called Revenge by Lu Xun that reflect on the crucifixions, wondering whether there is a meaning or lack of meaning in that text. Because he's in that act, because he thinks himself the Son of God, the King of the Jews, is to be crucified. God has forsaken him, and so he's the Son of Man after all. But the Israelites are crucifying even the Son of Man. Those who reek most of blood and filth are not those who crucify the Son of God, those who crucify the Son of Man. So you see what interests Lu Xun here is that kind of dichotomy between Son of God and Son of Man. One is entitled to think that Lu Xun depicts the death of Jesus as the ultimate expression of futility, But that's not sure, actually. For me, the crux of the text lies elsewhere, in the transition from the term Son of God to the one Son of Man. It may well be the frequent depiction of Christ as Son of God, independently from his humanity, that lies at the center of Lucian criticism. And the rediscovery of Jesus' disgraced humanity goes along the recapturing of China's history as one of blood, tears, and hunger. So China can accommodate Jesus when he is discovered first as Son of Man. This is a way of reading the text of Lucian. In that respect, the text of Lucian was premonitory of the way the figure of Jesus was going to inscribe itself later on into the political narrative of China. Question raised in China has been indeed one of the relevance of Jesus for a culture that does not lack in models of philosophers and sages. Aloysius Zhang, another Chang Chunchen, another famous Chinese theologian, observed that in a time of globalization, Jesus is first a model for all humanity. Maybe not for a given people, but to a universal set of values. Jesus and other figures in history have to be judged in terms of their present contribution to the task of building a civilization of justice, peace, love. The way Jesus leads men and women in transforming the world today provides us with a criteria of his relevance. Recalling Jesus today, I quote Chang Chunchen, is not about the remembrance of past things, it is rather about the emphasis put on our duty in this world. This text is stranger than one might think because in the 60s and 70s, for this author and many Chinese or Asian theologians, the stress was rather on finding common trait because Jesus and the Chinese past of the world, a kind of cultural approach of Jesus. And this is not the one that we see in this text. So there has been evolution in Chinese and Asian theology. Catholic theologians hope to make Christ and his person more accessible to people belonging to the Chinese cultural tradition. But pastoral concern should show the limit of the enterprise that was led in the 16th and 70s. Stressing Chinese uniqueness is not always the best way to attract the younger generations, especially when it comes to Taiwan and probably other places. In any case, having too general view of Chinese culture is also a way maybe of making the message of Jesus become poorer. I would say, plurality of the faces of Jesus and his appeal to a globalized world in which we have tasks for today might be indeed today the most prominent concepts. As a human person, Jesus comes from a cultural context that greatly differs from mainstream Chinese tradition. Beliefs in the salvation he brings in his person and deeds constitute the cornerstone of Christian faith. Consequently, their universal aspects are much more emphasized than the cultural and regional interpretation. Can Jesus as Christ still reveal himself with a Chinese face? If so, in which way does the Chinese face of Christ display new aspects of his mystery? That remains a focus of reflection till now. One way maybe of looking at this could be to look at the relationship between Jesus and the Father. We know that filial piety, xiao, humanity or benevolence, zhen, are central virtues. Many Chinese authors have seen xiao as a key for interpreting the New Testament. In the Confucian concept of xiao, there is a kind of natural revelation of the relationship between Jesus and his Father. As for the concept of filial piety, says Luo Kuang, another Chinese theologian, it regards life and not duty at its basis. The problem of Xiao is not having a duty, it is being grateful for the gift of life, being part of this process of transmission. Moreover, because filial piety is a natural manifestation of love, it is also the root of Zen. Cultivating filial piety is a way of forgetting oneself by relating to one's origin, to immerse oneself within the whole process of life. In other words, love is rooted into filial gratitude. And Jesus is the model of accomplishment of love because he exemplifies what real filial piety is about. The idea here is to find a characterization of Jesus that makes him both Chinese and universal. And the way we are grateful for the transmission of life, and we understand our mission according to such feeling that we experience in our life, might be a path toward the full revelation of Christ. There is another way to look at Christ from this Chinese perspective, not from the viewpoint of his relationship with the Father, but as being inhabited by the Spirit. Qi, of course, is a specifically Chinese concept, energy, spirit, breath, a power that makes everything grow according to its own nature. It is not material or spiritual. It points to the integrating factor between the various spheres of natural and human development. And several theologians, actually several from Hong Kong, have suggested that the anthropological riches developed by Chinese thinkers around the notion of Qi could enable Christians to internalize what the scripture says about the tireless circulation and the unifying function of the Spirit. For instance, we can see that in the healing powers proper of Christ. Such power illustrates how his inner rectitude, his total openness to the source of life, irradiated his body and made strength emit all around him. Chang Chun-Shen stresses the upward dynamism induced by the notion of Qi that unifies, as I said, into a whole material and spiritual. The manifestation of Jesus' Qi in his deed is a call to unify the different spheres of human existence and to transcend the various limitations of the latter. Or yet, Oscar Lu Dachang, uses the philosophy of Gabriel Narcisse and Teilhard for expressing the cosmic energy of Christ, so not of Jesus, but of the cosmic Christ, as he leads humankind to enter a never-ending process of development. The cosmic Christ is the fullest expression of a systemic dynamism contained already in the origin of life. In other words, a more concrete understanding of the working of the Spirit might finally help theologians to bridge a gap between the historical Jesus and the fullness of the cosmic Christ, the Qi manifested by the living Jesus finds its full expression in the energy that Christ, the risen Christ, irradiates throughout the whole cosmos. It is one and the same energy from the seed to the fullness of realization of all things. So, Hong Kong-based sister Madeleine Kwong stresses the continuity from the historical Jesus to the cosmic Christ, as I said. In the microcosm of the historical Jesus, the same forces are at play, the same circulating energies are the ones that animate the universe as a whole. And this is why the universe tends to be ultimately Christified. Jesus, master of history, accomplishes the potential for and love of life manifested by Chinese wisdom throughout the ages. So once again, two beautiful doors of making Jesus more Chinese while acknowledging his universal appeal, one by insisting on filial piety, one by renewing our understanding of the Spirit as working in the microcosm of our being and the macrocosm of the whole universe. There has been another attempt at, let's say, building up a Chinese Christology and stating its appeal towards reconciliation, which is also by Chang Chun-Chen, but is based on the philosophy on Fang Dongmei, Chinese philosopher, which had been representing life dynamic as a pyramid that ordered the various levels of existence: stuff, life, art, ethics, religion, are a path to which humankind accomplishes itself, pointing toward the Godhead that cannot be represented. Aloysius Chang Chun-Chen, see the upward and downward energy working through this pyramid, which I will not describe in detail, as manifestation of the divine, of the Spirit at work, while Christ, in his progressive cosmic manifestation, is the axis, giving its strength and meanings to the expansion of life. What is at work through the energies of the universe is always twofold: the communication of the divine to human nature and the glorification of the Son returning to the origin. Fang Dongmei's meditation on human existence and the way the different spheres of existence expand towards an omega helps us to understand how our universe is generated and regenerated through, in, and with Christ. This attempt at Christology might be a bit grand, you know, but I think that Chang Chun-Chen, by doing that, wants to show that in Chinese philosophy, you have resources for building up theological sums, theological synthesis that can be as englobing as the theological sums of the medieval period that were based, of course, on Greek concepts and logic. So maybe it's not what we need in that time. Do we need that kind of grand Christology? That's really a question. But it's interesting to see that we can use to the full concept as Dao, Qi, Wu, Taiji, and so on, in order to represent in another way the way Christ works in our work and the universe, and the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. This shows that in all culture you have insights that go from the mundane or from the cosmic to the metaphysical and to the theological. At least that's interesting to say, yes, we can do it. And in today's world, we can continue theological enterprises as ambitious as were the one that took place, let's say, from the fathers of the church till the end of the Middle Ages, in which the theological style started to change. Sister Maria Ko from Hong Kong also sketches out an approach to Jesus based on the Chinese understanding of the primacy of life. All those Christology are called, generally speaking, Christologies of life, based on the primacy of life. She starts from the offertory prayer, "Blessed are you, God, Lord of all creation," that graphically illustrates the encounter between heaven, earth, and man, happening through the making and the offering of bread and wine. However, rather than focusing on the cosmic Christ, she meditates on the historical Jesus. His affection for the material world, Wu Qing, or the Wu of stuff, and his affection for humankind, Zhen Qing. Jesus, she says, take his choice in mountains and water alike, in the wisdom and goodness of God that they exemplify and from which all goodness and wisdom come. His deeds and words, especially his parables, illustrate his knowledge of nature and animals, his attention to the natural process of growth. Another way to say, and we tackle here a research we haven't tackled yet, that the Jesus of the parable has a definite Taoist flavor. So here we are not with a Confucian Jesus, we are a Taoist Jesus that are deeply associated with the Chinese worldview. These affinities between the Taoist wisdom of non-action way and the words of attitudes of the historical Jesus are sometimes noted by Chinese scholars, but they do not easily expand into a full-fledged Christology. The path to be followed is not so easy to determine, but can be showed by this comment of this passage of one of the papers published by FABC again. To follow the Tao is to simply trust in the way, or the way of the cosmos, as shown to us in the natural expression of the universe. When we align ourselves to the way, we walk the way of selfless love. To walk the path is to live the kingdom of heaven in our lives. The way is the goal, and the goal is the way. So this is not really a Taoist text, I would say. No, this is a more cautious approach of what is Tao. But saying the way of the goal and the goal of the way has still a very Taoist flavor. When Chinese Christians actually proclaim that Jesus is the way, they interpret this procession of faith to an existential wisdom that identify way of life. Think about the word of Jesus. I have the way, life, and truth. The way is the reconciliation of truth and life. The play of sprouts and water, clouds and earth, fish and birds testify to the loving and everlasting energy working through the material and spiritual universe alike. So that was a Christology that was deeply anchored into Chinese philosophy and thought. But there are other Asian ways to build up Christology. And here I would like to come back to Kosuke Koyama, who is a very interesting theologian because he was first a pastor. And second, these Japanese worked mainly in Thailand. Though he had a kind of englobing view of the Asian continent. And he wrote a beautiful book, which is called Mount Fuji and Mount Sinai, a critique of idols, in which he says, Jesus established his centrality by going to the periphery. Centrality, periphery. Quite weak activity at the periphery. We remember how Koyama insists on weakness and softness. He's more creative than the strong activity at human center. When holiness and brokenness come together for the sake of the salvation of others, we have Christian sacrament. So this relationship between holiness and brokenness is important. For Koyama, what is holy, is broken. As the bread, of course, is broken. But I would say a man who is broken by life becomes holy because of that. A people who is broken by oppression becomes holy because of that. What is a sacrament is the union between brokenness and holiness. All theologies, says again Koyama, must express the creativity of Jesus Christ. The theology is to be creative, as Jesus was creative, who is broken and holy, holy and broken for our salvation. The Asian cosmological minds, continues Koyama, tends to embrace often indiscriminately, while the Western eschatological mind tends to confront. What is important here is that Christianity teaches a new combination of the eschatological embracing us. The eschatology, the end of time, is to think at the same time about the gathering of all things and what I would call the paradoxical centrality of the periphery. Brokenness are the way towards the completion of all things. Once again, I find Koyama an extremely inspiring theologian. Let's go now to another question, how to represent Jesus. And there is an interesting reflection of Michael Amalados, an Indian, this time on that. He says, we cannot use figures like Rama, Krishna, and so on, coming from other religions. It will offend everyone. We can certainly use some figures that come from other religions. For instance, Jesus as a dancing figure. But still, after some time, in the case it was done in India, in Bangalore, it was judged by people that so it could be explained, it may scandalize simple people. So it was removed. So says Amalados, the limitations that go with such symbols are not applicable to symbols that come from nature, like the tree, water, light, sun, moon, star, sky, wind. They do not belong to any one culture of religion. So he says the representation of Jesus is to be deeply rooted into symbols that related to the natural world. Yes, Jesus is light, the Spirit is water, the kingdom of God is a tree, and so on. Those symbols indeed tell us a lot and relate the natural world to the divine world. Now let's have a look at what I would call a figurative theology. So it is a painting done by the Sichuanese artist Li Jinyuan for the German foundation Misereor that represents the Sermon of the Mount. You see here Jesus as a kind of light. The whole picture is based on light. On the lake, surging from the water towards heaven, with mountains and a sea that look like formed by people, and you have 4 little scenes that express 4 beatitudes. So try to keep this picture in mind because I'm going to make some comments on it, but we are already startled by this figuration of Jesus, which is like light or mountain. He's integrated into the mountain, going from the sea towards heaven, and this connection between heaven, mountain, and people. So Jesus delivered the Beatitude from the Mount and preached the parable of the kingdom from the lake, which might remind us of Confucius. The wise find pleasure in water, the virtuous find pleasure in mounts. Okay. The mountains of the hill speak of quietness and inner peace. They make us enter into communion with the eternal. Water shows us how to adapt to the proclivity of the field and to run till the sea. The universe in motion is an endless process of change. So there is a complementarity between water and mountains. The parables of the kingdom encourage us to enter into the wisdom of a God who germinates in all things and whose kingdom grows till the conception of time. The Beatitude turn our hearts toward the perfection and boundless goodness of the Father. Clearly, mountain and water cannot exist one without the other. From the Lake of Galilee, the ascending hills are seen their glory, and from the mount, the water of the lake reflect the splendor of the sky. Wisdom and goodness, change and eternity, movement and quietness are one in God. So the rendering of the Sermon on the Mount offered by Li Jinyuan is structured by this relationship between mount and water. At the bottom of the painting, a seal reminds us of one of the basic intuitions of Lao Tzu. The highest excellence is like water. The excellence of water appears in its benefiting all things, and its occupying without striving the low place which all men dislike. Shangshan Zhuo Shui. Okay? What is good springs from above, as water does. Water descends from high and goes to the most hidden, humble places. In the endless moves and changes of water, something is hinted of the mystery of incarnation, the mystery of a God who strives for the place of the servant, the place like water nobody else wants to occupy, going to the lowest. This is what Christ does, as water does in Taoist meditation. At the same time, the dynamic of the painting we saw is clearly ascending. Jesus seems to be rooted into the mount in a way that reminds the viewer of the techniques through which Chinese painters evoke the wood, the rocks, and the cloud. This is not traditional portrait. The cosmic aspect of Christ is in the nature-like quality of his figure and body. He belongs to the stuff of nature. What Jesus preaches is meant to transform the world, to animate it, to make matter and spirit become one in the fulfilled person of Christ. This might remind us of Teilhard de Chardin, whose Li Jinyuan has read, to re-establish all things in Christ, in heaven and on earth. Jinyuan perceives a deep continuity between Teilhard's way of understanding the Christian mystery and the Taoist worldview that finds the Tao at work in all natural and spiritual phenomena. Taoist mystic then is a door to which to enter the Sermon on the Mount and the divine love manifested on the Christ. And we might think about chapter 40 of Lao Tzu, the movement of the Tao by contrary proceeds, and weakness marked the course of Tao mighty deeds. Fan Che Dao Che Dong, Zhuo Che Dao Che Yong. Okay, so the movement of the Tao is paradoxical and it goes through weakness. This is a beautiful commentary, I would say, on the whole course of Jesus' life and on what the Sermon on the Mount tell us. The ascending Christ at the center of the painting, the rays of light that divide the four scenes represented at each corner draws a sign of a cosmic cross, a cross that redefines the boundary of the universe, a cross that enlightens the suffering and darkness that still inhabit the world and that direct everything towards its fulfillment. The four little scenes that we haven't seen very clearly show signs of hope and harmony, just like someone, for instance, saves a little school in the remote mountains of Sichuan. Signs of hope and harmony suddenly appear through the coming of volunteer teachers to a remote school. The Franciscan complicity between men and animals is shown in those scenes too. The visit to the sick and prisoner. The Christ of the Sermon on the Mount is also the one who says, I was sick, I was a prisoner, and you came to visit me. And this is a figure received such a cosmic dimension within the painting. The poor ultimately becomes the universal Christ. So this is indeed a painting which is centered around reconciliation. Blessed are the peacemakers. Two questions can be heard into it. What does it mean to be a peacemaker today? What kind of attitude and choice will make us become poor in spirit in a China that has evolved into an equal society? These questions are not asked in a polemical or pessimistic way. Discreetly are evoked the people of goodwill who do just what they can in a difficult natural and social environment and who in doing so conform themselves to the word of Christ, even if they ignore it. Le Guin likes in a special way the parable of the mustard seed that becomes a big tree, in the shadow of which birds can see, the tree of the kingdom, which also resonates with a well-known saying of the Lao Tzu, the tree which filled the arms grew from the tiniest sprout. The tower of 9 stories rose from a small heap of earth. The journey of 1,000 li commenced with a single step. It's like saying, from the smallest of the seed has grown a tree in which all birds come to sing. So the 4 little scenes that adorn the 4 corners of the painting give us to contemplate the seeds of the kingdom to come in China and in the whole world. It seems almost that the painter gives us to see the invisible world within these round-shaped seeds. Each of the 4 scenes capture the potency of the big tree, the living tree of the coming Christ, present at the center of the painting. We may look at that painting again, and you will see Christ present at the middle as a rock and a light. The relationship between the shape and the inner shapes of the mountain and of the lake and of a crowd, the 4 little scenes with animals, with a school, with people visiting sick and prisoners, and you might understand better how those 4 little scenes represent somehow the seeds of the kingdom that is prepared by the little deeds we do. And they make sense in a relationship with a Christ that occupies the center of the painting. And of course, you will notice that the whole of the painting is shaped as a cross, a cosmic cross, somehow, that transcends our words and brings us to its cosmic salvation. So this is a way to say that representing Christ in Asia is not only an intellectual operation, it is a way of recapturing the small deeds, the small signs of hopes that take place every day, to recapture them with our sensitivity, emotion, aesthetic senses, and to give it to be seen in artworks that can speak to a multitude. So indeed, it is a task, and it is a task of hope to represent Christ in Asia and, for instance, here in China. This opens us up to what will be the last stage of our lessons, so lesson 9 and 10, that will be centered more closely about what it means to do reconciliation and the way we do reconciliation, again, by sharing in our resources and classics. But the focus this time will be really how do we reconciliate, and how is that really a central task of Asian theology today.